cow, something looks shadowy in the night. That's right, you voted for it. It was the #2 most requested guide of last week over at preachgaming.com. And you guys requested some Shadow Priest action, and I don't blame you. Shadow Priest seem to be going in all sorts of crazy directions. Blizzard, what are you doing? You're stressing us out. What the fuck? Vampiric Touch nerfed by 75%. Devouring Plague removed, and then you brought it back again. What's going on? Oh my god. So I can completely sympathise with your position and why you wanted me to take a look at it, so we will. That's how we roll. Shadow Priests have been altered a whole bunch. They've had all the spell mechanics sort of twisted around. All the basic spells are still there. In fact, you can see Devouring Plague did make it back into the game. There she blows. But they've all been sort of mishmash, swapped around, and everyone's sort of like, ugh, what's going on, Preacher? So we're going to have a look at it today, and I'm going to tell you it's actually great news. I'm actually very happy with the Shadow Priest changes. I think it's a good thing, and I think the talents actually reflect that really well. So I think you're going to have a really great time with the Shadow Priest. I'm going to go over the changes now. We're going to jump into some gameplay afterwards. All good. All good. Okay. So let's jump at our specializations. Shadow. This is where we're going to talk about some of the early changes. Because, like I say, the spells are still the same. They still have the same name. However, they all kind of do different little things now. So we need to be aware of those changes when we go live. Shadow Word Pain is exactly one of the ones that stayed the same. It's just a shadow dot dealing damage over time. Happy, happy, happy. Mind Flay remained the same. It's a nice channeled filler spell while we wait for our Mind Blast, etc. That's just going to go ahead and do some dot damage as well. Cool. No big changes there, Blizzard. Happy, happy. What up? Pop your brakes, kid. Mind Blast. Mind Blast got a nice big change. It blasts the target for now 20,000 shadow damage. And what's this? Generates a Shadow Orb. That is correct, guys. Shadow Orb, random generation of Shadow Orbs is gone. Blizzard has finally seen sense in this ridiculous ability, Shadow Orbs, buffing our shadow damage, being all random, and it can proc sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. Oh, thank God. Oh, Blizzard, we're so happy for this one. We really, really are. Shadow Orbs are now generated from spells and guaranteed to generate. This is fantastic news. A little backstory on why this is fantastic news and why I'm excited for it. One of the big problems with Shadow Priests is mainly Shadow Word Pain. Shadow Word Pain is refreshed by Mind Flay in Cataclysm, as we well know. But the word refresh is actually used incorrectly. What Mind Flay does is extend the duration of the current spell. So what happened with some Shadow Priests who were early and new to the class and just learning, they seemed to be firing off all the correct spells, but something just wasn't working right. Their damage seemed obscenely low. And that's because Shadow Word Pain, when you initially cast it, needed to be a most powerful Shadow Word Pain you could possibly cast. Because then Mind Flay would keep that super powerful Shadow Word Pain rolling all the way through the fight. And if you casted a weak Shadow Word Pain, you're essentially cutting your own feet off before you'd even started doing anything. So what Blizzard decided is, that's just not fun. And it isn't fun, it really isn't. We want a nice, sturdy Shadow Word Pain rolling all the time. So instead of it taking advantage of all sorts of crazy buffs, other than our spell power trinkets, which is normal class mechanics for a caster, especially with dots, let's keep that mechanic, but let's stop tying it into this randomness of Shadow Orbs, which have a huge effect on spells like Shadow Word Pain. So I'm so glad this has happened. This is really cool. On to Vampiric Touch, which is the one that received all sorts of criticism recently as it was nerfed to the ground. Ah, was it? No, it wasn't. Vampiric Touch was in fact incredibly overpowered. It was stupidly powerful on beta, and now it's been brought back into line, guys. Nothing to worry about. You're not going to be sat in a corner crying and crying, oh my Vampiric Touch, where did you go? I'm sure on the WoW normal forums you'll see all sorts of people QQing and all that stuff, but it's actually been brought back into line. A little design idea of Blizzard at the moment is they don't want multi-dotting to be stupidly powerful like it is in Cataclysm and has been for every single expansion. If a class that did a lot of dot damage, Affliction Warlocks, Shadow Priests, could go ahead and do multi-dotting, especially if it was two bosses that were up at the same time, then in fact their damage skyrocketed ridiculously. If you look at Valionia and Thoralion, and also the Ascendant Council, bosses like that where there was two bosses up constantly, and the Shadow Priests, the Moonkins, and the Affliction Locks could keep both targets dotted indefinitely, their damage was just outrageous. Stupidly crazy. So Blizzard said, let's just tone back dots a bit and rely a little bit more on single target damage. Sure, you will get a damage bonus when you're multi-dotting. That's fine, but it shouldn't be crazy amounts of damage. So this is a really nice thing to bring into line, nerfing the dots down and buffing our single target spells. Happy with the change, agree with the direction. I really do. Devouring Plague is back, and he's got the two googly pink eyes of death. You've been rubbing your eyes after you farted, Mr. Devouring Plague. That's what's happened there. Devouring Plague is now a cooldown. It's a spell that consumes all of the caster's shadow orbs to deal some shadow damage and afflict the target with a disease that causes 6,000 shadow damage. The direct damage and duration is increased based on the number of shadow orbs consumed. So we now get an extra dot based on our shadow orbs. This is such a nice idea for Devouring Plague, is to make sure people are using it correctly. And you'll see up here we get this nice interface for the 3 shadow orbs. A 3 shadow orb Devouring Plague should hit very, very nicely. So I'm super happy about how Devouring Plague is. I think this is a great idea. Love Blizzard's shadow changes so far. And of course we've got shadow orbs. They're generated by Mind Blast and Shadowy Apparitions. They also generate it, and it's used to cast Devouring Plague and empower Psychic Horror. That's it. All the stuff with it modifying our shadow damage and doing all this kind of whack stuff with our spells is gone. It's literally something you build up so you can fire off a big Devouring Plague or use an empowered Psychic Horror. That's it. So nice. Really happy with the changes. Good job, Blizzard. So that's the changes overall, guys, okay? Those are the changes to your core spells. So don't panic. All the stuff is still there, and in fact it's made the rotation and priority system a little bit more exciting, because we no longer need to worry about, oh, is my Shadow Word Pain powerful enough? I just don't know. We don't need to worry about that anymore. It's all nicely baked in, and we've lost the randomness. I hate randomness in World of Warcraft. It makes some people do incredible DPS one fight, terrible DPS the other fight. With randomness being eliminated, it's just a great, great thing. So really happy about it. Let's jump into the talents, and these actually work really well for Shadow. I'm really happy. I'm actually in a great place with Shadow at the moment. I think they've done really well. The first tier, not as exciting as the others. You've got Void Tendrils. These summon shadowy tendrils out of the ground, rooting all targets within 8 yards for 20 seconds. Killing the tendril will cancel this effect. A nice little utility spell, I thought, for if we're doing some mind searing and we want to keep all the mobs nice and gathered. The tank's gone ahead to get the next pack, but we've still got quite a few mobs all gathered up. We can nicely Void Tendril them up. We've got Psyfiend, as we discovered in the other one. You're going to plot this little dude down, and he's going to start psychic horroring things around him. For PvE, not that great. And of course, Mind Control's thrown into there as well. Mind Control, obviously, is situational. Sometimes, there's some bosses where you can Mind Control a specific ad. I'm thinking about Thorim in Ulduar had this ability. You could Mind Control one of his ads, and that gave you access to not only intense damage, but brilliant debuffs you could put on the boss and help out the fight. So again, situational. Void Tendrils isn't a must for raiding by any means. Most often than not, we're not going to be able to root things. Dominate Mind, situational sometimes. Psyfiend, situational sometimes, which is a great idea. In tier 30, at level 30, you're going to either get Phantasm. When you fade, you remove all movement impairing effects from yourself and become untargetable by ranged attacks, and your movement speed is unhindered by 3 seconds. This could be a really, really important cooldown for raiding. This could be super important, so be aware of that. Angelic Feather, as we discovered, again, could be awesome for raiding. If we're dropping this in the caster camp, giving the whole casters a 60% movement speed, that is super powerful. For the entire raid, so good. Really like the look of Angelic Feather. I'm looking forward to seeing this in a raid environment and taking full advantage of it to increase our DPS. For leveling and for 5-mans, I went with Body and Soul. When we cast Power Word, Shield, or Leap of Faith, we increase the target's movement speed by 60%, and that applies to us. We get the Body and Soul effect as well. So if we need to move super fast to our next DPS target, we can do that. We can Power Word Shield ourselves and then fly off to the next Get Out of Danger free zone. Love Body and Soul. We've got the next tier, we get some sort of DPS-ish type cooldown. Let's have a read of it. It's got From Darkness Comes Light. The Surge of Darkness. When your Shadow Word Pain deals damage, there is a 15% chance your next Shadow Word Death will treat the target as if it was below 20% health. There's a good chance this is awesome. 15% chance isn't that bad for a spell that will be ticking constantly. And Shadow Word Death does hit very, very hard. I actually think this might be cool. However, it does have that random element in it. And you know as well as anybody, I hate randomness in my DPS. Mindbender, we've looked at this again. It deals twice as much damage as your Shadow Fiend. It's on a 4-minute cooldown for the Shadow Priest. It could be awesome as well. I don't suspect with the changes to Vampiric Touch we'll be dealing it for mana. But for Super Burst, definitely worth thinking about. I chose Archangel for this one. Dark Archangel or Dark Evangelism. It increases the damage done by your Mind Flay, Mind Spike, Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death by 25% for 18 seconds. It's on a 1.5 minute cooldown. I like this because I don't like randomness. I like saying, right, I've got my trinkets up, I've got everything going for me, or Bloodlust is up, and I can fire off Dark Archangel and be an absolute gangster for the next 18 seconds while I've got all these buffs up. And it affects Shadow Word Death, so if we're in the 20% range and we're firing off Shadow Word Deaths, we can also use this spell to get nice big execute damage as well. So I like Archangel, I like the look of it, but I'm not saying to you that From Darkness Comes Light could be a good talent. I'll have to wait for the Mathematicians to work that one out for you because I simply just don't know the answer. At level 60 we get some sort of protection. Desperate Prayer instantly heals you for 30% of your total health, straight up, no big deal. We get Spectral Guise. Your shadow blurs into the darkness, leaving your true form behind. As a shadow, you are stealth, but remain in combat. It lasts 6 seconds. That is a very PvP-orientated talent, let's face facts. It's not going to find much of a place inside the PvE world, but PvPers rejoice. I went with Angelic Bulwark because I love these kind of talents. Why? Because they just make the raid easier when we can do stuff like this. Anytime a damaging attack brings you below 30% health, you gain an absorption shield equal to 20% of your total health lasting 20 seconds. Sometimes, in raids, in dungeons, shit happens. Let's face facts, shit happens sometimes. Angelic Bulwark can just be that passive ability that just kicks in and saves your ass at the last seconds, buys you a few extra seconds for the healers to top you up, all that kind of thing, and I love that, okay? I like the sound of Angelic Bulwark. Desperate Prayer is cool, but I like Angelic Bulwark. I've just got this passive ability, I don't need to worry about it. Should some crap happen to me, I'm going to be safe. Really, really like it. At level 75, we get some sort of DPS cooldown. Now, I think this is where the talent system kind of falls apart a little bit, but I'll show you why. We get Twist of Fate. After damaging or healing a target below 20% health, you deal 15% increased damage and healing for 10 seconds. So, situationally, this is going to be awesome for a boss that goes into a Berserker Rage at 20%, and we just need to kill it. It needs to die now, or we are going to wipe. If you think about Lord Riley, if you think about Beth Tillak, bosses like that they need to die in that execute phase. We can set up the execute phase perfectly. Happens a lot of times. Chimeron, another brilliant example of this. Nefarian Heroic, another great example of this. So many bosses where we can set it up nicely and we can play nice and safe until we reach this execute in rage phase, and then we need to burn him down like a total gangster. Twist of Fate can come in really, really handy there. Nice little spell. We've then got Power Infusion. Infuses the target with power, increasing spell casting speed by 20% and reducing your mana cost. So we don't care about the mana cost. I think we're going to be fine on mana from what I've read on the Shadow Priest. I haven't played it yet, so I could be wrong. But I think we're going to be absolutely fine and dandy. But this is a huge DPS on-demand cooldown. And as someone who doesn't like randomness, this spell speaks buckets to me. This thing looks like Optimus Prime has just come in, sat on my chair and said, don't worry, bro, we got this. Power Infusion looks awesome. Especially if we need burst damage. In the bosses like this, I'm thinking of things like Spine of Deathwing Heroic, where we needed that burst on demand right the hell now. For a limited period, I just need to blow the crap out of this mob. Very, very interesting spell. The one I went with was Divine Insight. Now for Shadow, the reason I went with this is periodic damage from your Mind Flake refreshes the duration of your Shadow Word Pain. Okay, so we need to understand how useful this is in saving global cooldowns. This was my thinking on it. Now, again, Power Infusion, very, very good. Twist of Fate, also very, very good. But I think for overall gameplay, while we're doing 5-mans and stuff like that, I'm going to rock around with the Divine Insight and just let Mind Flay refresh my Shadow Word Pain, just to save me having to keep refreshing it. Shadow Word Pain tends to be just a global cooldown I don't need to spend. And while I'm doing all sorts of stuff, I love multi-dotting and refreshing it with Mind Flay all over the targets. Keeping my Shadow Word Pain ticking while also dealing damage with Mind Flay allows me to do a lot more AoE damage and things like that. I really like it. I also don't really like refreshing my Shadow Word Pain if I'm DPSing a boss. I want to see the maths on using Power Infusion on cooldown and just not having to spend a global cooldown refreshing Shadow Word Pain. This could be terrible, guys. I'm not the best Shadow Priest in the world, but I've done my homework. I could not see any maths deciding between the three. All of them have the great situational uses. For me, I'm going to rock with Divine Insight, although I'm very tempted to rock with Power Infusion, but for this sake, I'll stick with the Divine Insight. At level 90, we get Cascade. We launch a Holy Bolt at a target, which grows in power as it travels. It does damage. It's like a Flame Orb. It's like a Flame Orb that travels backwards and forwards. It splits damage between all the other guys. That's very, very situational. I know that Blizzard was aiming for situational use of these, but that's very situational where we're going to have all mobs in a row. Of course, if they're all in a pack, it'll still affect them, but we'll see on that one. Divine Star, it fires Divine Star in front of you, travelling 24 yards, causing damage to all enemies in its path. After reaching its destination, it will return to you. So again, firing it into a pack, taking full advantage, and then dragging it out. Again, a bit of AoE damage going on there. And then we get Halo. It creates a ring of holy energy around you that quickly expands and grows in power up to 30 yards away. Deals holy damage to enemies and up to some healing. Again, it's AoE-ish. Not much to say on these guys. Not really much to say. Neither of them tickle my nuts. Neither of them tickle me nuts as much as I would like them to. They're all pretty cool. Don't get me wrong. They all sound pretty cool, but they're all very similar. They all seem to have a similar purpose, whereas these three, Twist of Fate, Power Infusion, Divine Insight, have very different purposes. All three of these, relatively similar in style. Yes, I know they're slightly different, but they all have a very AoE-ish travelling feel to them. I don't like it. Let's look at the glyphs. Not much choice in the world of Shadow, but there's still some. There's Dark Binding, where you can now cast Prayer of Mending, Renew, Leap of Faith without cancelling Shadow Form. So if you do need to do some off-healing, this is a great little glyph to pick up. Glyph of Dispersion reduces the cooldown by 15 seconds. I love that. I picked that up. Fade reduces the damage taken by 10%. Be aware of that one if you're doing some soaking or there's some big AoE damage incoming. I can imagine most raiding Shadow Priests will be rocking the Fade glyph all the way. Going down, we had Mind Blast. When you critically hit with your Mind Blast, you cause the target to be unable to move. It's never going to affect a boss, therefore it's never going to affect my glyph choices. Go away. Mind Spike. When you deal damage with your Mind Spike, the cast time of your next Mind Blast is reduced by 50%, stacking 2 times. Sometimes we just can't dot targets. That's a simple fact. And we just need to do a couple of Mind Spikes, followed by a Mind Blast, and we're happy, happy days. Like it. Nice stuff. Glyph of Powered Shield. 20% of your absorb from Powered Shield is converted into healing. That still affects us as Shadow Priest. Don't worry about it. And we also have... What else did I pick up? Reflective Shield. This is going to be great for leveling, guys. It's not too useful in instances by any means, but for leveling, you are going to be picking this up. You're shielding yourself, especially if you picked up Body and Soul, so you can get that nice movement speed while you're leveling, running from mob to mob. Every time someone damages you while you've got the shield on, you're going to do some damage back. Really, really like it. I think that's a very, very cool little glyph. And other than that, there's a few here which are shadow orientated. I'll show you here. Your Devouring Plague ability converts an additional 10% of the damage it deals into healing. If you're worried about your healing, it's a very damage-intensive fight on your balls, then go ahead and pick this up. Glyph of Mind Flay. Mind Flay no longer slows your victim's movement speed. Instead, when the channel completes, you'll be granted 100% increased movement speed or until cancelled, which is very, very nice. Again, for a big movement heavy fight, we can Mind Flay off, then we get 100% movement speed. We can mix that with Body and Soul. We're talking super fast lightning race car type Shadow Priest. Pretty cool. And Vampiric Touch, again, converts more into healing. So we've got a lot of healing stuff there. For your Lobby ones, we have discussed these before. There's no really fun ones for the Shadow Priest, unfortunately. Pretty sad. There is Glyph of Shadow, which reduces the appearance of your Shadow Form to be less transparent. I'll stick it in, although I actually love Shadow Form. I've always loved Shadow Form since vanilla. But I'll go ahead and stick it in so you can see the difference. There's me Glyph. Do I have to drop Shadow Form? I just think that looks crapper. It just looks like I've turned my graphics down. Well, I know you guys were probably interested in seeing that, that's why I stuck it in. A quick overview of the spells, other than the ones we've already talked about. There isn't much to see. Let's see what's different. I did have one I wanted to point out to you. Mind Say still looks the same. Okay, Psychic Horror. Oh, I want you to know as well, we get silence passively now. Every Shadow Priest gets silence. Rejoice. We wanted silence. We like doing some interrupts. We like helping out our raid, but we couldn't pick it up in a PvE spec. So now we can. We get it passively. That's cool. Psychic Horror, this is the other way of spending your Shadow Orbs. Consumes all your Shadow Orbs to terrify the target, causing them to tremble. 1 second. The amount of Shadow Orbs is going to affect how long they're doing it. Orbs consumed, and to drop their main hand weapon. So you get a disarm, but it's going to cost you Shadow Orbs, and how long they're disarmed and frozen for is based on how many Shadow Orbs you've got. Okay, so with 3 Shadow Orbs, you get 3 seconds. So 3 seconds of disarm. Very cool for the PvPers. We're obviously going to use it on Devouring Plague pretty much 100% of the time exclusively. Other than that, they've remained the same, guys. So I'm going to jump into some gameplay now and just show you how these new mechanics are affecting the Shadow Priest overall. Alright, guys?